Assalamualaikum dan salam sejahtera. Anda sedang menonton rakaman khas agenda Awani kerana ada satu mesyuarat penting, iaitu mesyuarat ketua-ketua penasihat sains di rantau Asia Pasifik. And for that I would like to speak in English because I have two very interesting gentlemen to discuss things with this afternoon or tonight. And of course, closest to me, you know Professor Tan Sri Zakri, a very important man who advised our Prime Minister on the issues of science, technology and innovation. But for the first time, I have the honor of having Sir Peter Gluckman. Thank you so much. You play almost the same role like Professor Tan Sri Zakri, but for New Zealand. And because I'm an All Blacks fan, which I will declare from the onset, there's a lot of science when I watch the All Blacks that's involved. You know, when I listen to videos after videos on YouTube about how they train, diet and everything. And then I look at the kiwi fruit and people think it's from New Zealand. It's not even from New Zealand. And then the manuka honey and all that. But in all of that, there's one thread that goes through all, which is sustainability and thinking about the long term, not just for short-term gain. So, because I've been interviewing Prof. Tan Sri Zakri a lot, I'm going to start with you, Sir Gluckman, on a lot of things have been said on this show about the policy of science and innovation, advising the leadership about science and innovation. But I guess for the layman out there, how do you make the leadership of a country put science and innovation to the center of everything that they do in terms of policy and execution?
Well, I think the starting point is very simple, and that is to say science is a part of every part of our lives, whether we're looking about the health of our population, the health of our environment, the health of our economy, the health of our society. Science is part of it. It's an inherent base bit of information. We always want, and we all want our governments to make better decisions in policies in all those areas. And of course, policy involves many other things than knowledge. It involves fiscal priorities, involves public values, political values, and so forth. But their decisions will always be so much better when they're informed by the knowledge. And so my principal task is actually to help the government use science better in policy making across the whole of government, not just in the science, technology, innovation, for economic growth, but for social development, for environmental development, for human development.
Yes.
Now, the more governments see value in science across all of what it does, the more that they will see the importance of good education, of good STEM education, science, technology education, mathematics education, the more they will see that that does lead to innovation, not just in products, but innovation in the way that society operates, and innovation in the way companies operate and so forth. And the relationship between investment in science by governments and economic growth is actually unarguable. It's quite clear that those countries that invest more in R&D, in science, in education, higher education, there's a benefit for the whole population over time.
How do you move it beyond the political process that looks at maybe, let's say, 5-year terms? Because a lot of things about science, technology, innovation, it takes a longer term look. You know, you can't have this big R&D to find maybe a blue sky research to have results in 5 years. But the commitment to stay there, you know, to keep on the course across cycles of elections.
Well, I face that challenge in New Zealand, as I'm sure most of my colleagues around the world do, because it's always this trade-off for any government between what do they do for short-term electoral gain as opposed to that investment model which says that science has its return over 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And so that comes to the second part of the job of a person like me. It's not just persuading the politician that science is important. You've got to persuade the people in the community. You've got to reach out, not patronise them, but engage with them in a way that they themselves see the value of their taxpayers' money being invested for the long term. And if you can get that across, then governments will follow, because governments are a reflection, ultimately, of what their communities want.
So, Gluckman, can you give one example that you are so proud of over the things that have been achieved that way?
Well, yes, I can. When I was first appointed in 2009, there was a lot of concern in New Zealand about youth mental health. There was a lot of teenage suicides, lots of antisocial behaviour, excess drinking, binge drinking and so forth. And the Prime Minister said to me he was going to set up a committee of stakeholders to look at the problem. I said to the Prime Minister, no. Why don't we review all the science and understand what it is about the biology of a child transitioning to be an adult? And from that, there'll be some new policy domains we should think about. And it took 18 months, a very deep report by the academic community of New Zealand and internationally to our Prime Minister.
Yep.
From that, he turned the policy makers and said, this is what we know, this is what we don't know, what do you recommend we now do? And in the middle of the global financial crisis, the Prime Minister, with me sitting next to him at the press conference, announced we're going to spend a lot of money on youth mental health. The scientists have recommended and the policy makers agree. These are the things we should try and do. We don't know if any of them will work, but we're prepared to try, and we'll set it up in such a way we can evaluate.
Okay.
That's a Prime Minister saying we can use science to try and improve things, but we have to be prepared to try things and evaluate. I was very proud of that because it showed how evidence can be used to allow politicians through what are otherwise very complicated and politically sensitive issues.
Professor, just a short remark to that. We are not too much different. Some of the issues are, parallel to what we have. So that's the learning curve of the Asia Pacific that we want to converge.
Yes. In fact, this interface between science and policymakers or with the politician is a common problem among and between nations. And the concern of politicians or policymakers, and our country is no exception, is how science, technology and innovation could impact on the country. In particular, can science and technology generate jobs for the citizens of the country? And secondly, can science and technology create wealth for the people? Those are the two issues that are on the minds of political leaders. And of course, today with the global challenges, you would have to factor in issue of water, energy, healthcare, and food security, among others.
More and more in the 21st century, issues that beset a nation is across borders, transnational issues, the haze that we're seeing around right now. So I want to get both gentlemen's view on that, on science diplomacy. And I know Prof. Tan Sri Zakaria has been speaking about it on Awani, but it's good to get Sir Gluckman's view on it, because sometimes if we look at the boat people, then there's a lot of different views and stuff. But the moment we put scientists across national borders to talk about issues, I think they can do more as compared to maybe our diplomats and ambassadors. That's up for debate right after this. Hi, thank you. You're still watching Agenda Awani. It's a very special one, recorded on the sideline of a very important meeting of the Chief Scientific Advisors in the Asia-Pacific region, and the third meeting. But I want to go straight to, because there's only at any one time 20 living New Zealanders who can get the Order of New Zealand. And Sir Peter Gluckman, one of them, sitting right here in front of me, and science diplomacy. Sir Gluckman, how do you look at it? Because sometimes people get frustrated. The civilization of a country wants it, but leadership of a country doesn't want it. But with science, how does it go?
Well, science is a way of crossing cultural barriers. All said and done, science is a universal language. We can use science in many ways to help countries project themselves in ways to other countries they might not otherwise relate to. But more importantly, I think we're now facing a lot of issues which are transnational. That's why we're here together at this meeting. Those transnational issues have a strong scientific component, be it climate change, be it food security, be it the risk of a pandemic. These are issues where we have to work better together. Now, if you think about all of those, they have the same kind of problem that we within our own countries face as science advisors. We don't live in technocratic societies, we live in democracies.
Yep.
So ultimately, science doesn't determine what a government does, science informs what a government does.
Okay.
Equally, if we go to the transnational agenda, what I would like to see is that we can agree on what the science is amongst the international science community and take that out of the equation, so then our politicians and our diplomats can find a solution trying to resolve their various jurisdictional and national interests, but not debating the science. Because all said and done, good science over whether it's fish stocks or climate change or how one would manage a pandemic should be independent of national boundaries and national interests. It's only on top of that that should inform the policymakers and the diplomats so they can then debate quite as they should, their national interests, but not debating the science. And so I think we've got to get better as scientists of not pretending that we are the global government. We're not. We are people that can provide information, analysed in a particular set of ways, relatively free of the compounding issues of values which are inevitably in dispute, and try and lift the quality of the conversation and the decision making, be it over refugees or haze or pandemics or responding to national disasters. We have a common language, Zachary and I. We can talk in science the same way, and that can help our countries interact better over these complex issues.
For Zachary, diplomats like to call it the track 2 discussion, where it's not really between diplomats, but you know, it's discussed between academy, intellectuals and stuff. But I think this can be another track that can help, because we do look at issues like the South China Sea. You know, people are worried about countries reclaiming land over small islands when, you know, we haven't even studied the biodiversity there and its role in climate change, for example. So how do we help enhance this track of scientific input into the decision?
Well, in fact, there are quite a number of examples now that we can observe, and a very well-known one is the role of the Intergovernmental Platform on Climate Change. In fact, the IPCC is a very good example of science in diplomacy, whereas Sir Peter was saying about how scientists have a common language, and that language is apolitical. And in fact, this apolitical language promotes good relation between countries. So when you ask about the problem or the conflict in the South China Seas, you are absolutely right. I think there should be a time where the scientists should get together more and know the ecosystem or the riches of this area, and articulate to government with the view to collaborate and utilize those resources for the common goods and to lessen the temperature of political conflict.
Please, sir.
If you think about the international agenda of 2015, there are 3 major discourses either underway that have been completed. The first is obviously the climate change meetings coming up in Paris in a few weeks' time. But secondly, just a few weeks ago, the United Nations adopted the Sustainable Development Goals. And a few months before that, in Sendai, we had the UN meeting on disaster risk reduction. Those have dominated the international agenda this year. Each one of those is heavily dependent on science, not only for the discussion, but for the actions that follow from each of those. And so and what we're seeing worldwide is a greater appreciation that science really does play a part in finding solutions to international problems. I wear another hat. I chair the International Network of Science Advisors to Governments. And we're finding increasingly in these international discussions, governments do see the role of science and science advice.
Interesting, because this is the APEC economist, chief scientific advisors, or equivalent meeting. And if I ask you to take that lens and look at the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, for example, you would not throw to me IP patents and stuff, but you'll be coming from the scientific need for that to happen.
Well, first of all, APEC is the hub of innovation in the 21st century. This is where the population is, where the most exciting ideas, the most interesting things. It's where economic growth has to happen, but it's also the centre of the world's natural disasters. We have to solve those problems. It is where the issues of food security, of water and energy security, of sea level rise will happen with their greatest intensity. We have an obligation, I believe, as the leaders of science in the APEC countries to work out how we can share ideas, how we can learn from each other, where we can get to give common advice to our governments to help them make better decisions collectively. At the end of the day, we all want the APEC region, the Asia Pacific region, to be economically more robust, to be politically more stable, to be socially more stable, and to be environmentally sustainable. We all have that ambition, and science can play a large part in helping us get there. And Zachary's a splendid example of that, with all the work he's done on biodiversity around the globe.
But then you would also empathize there would be groups in the less developed nation or developing nations that will be fearful of such a positive disruption.
No, but that's the other challenge, and there's a real challenge in the whole international arena about, as the world becomes more technological, as science becomes more important, how do we avoid creating a new kind of colonialism based on knowledge? And how do we help those small countries use technology for their own benefit to make their own choices about science? And I think you'll find that through UNESCO, through this discussion over the next 2 days, everybody's looking with sensitivity to that. And one of the advantages of APEC is it does include a number of countries that are not as developed. They're not the United States, they're not Japan, they're not New Zealand. They're countries like Papua New Guinea, for example, which have still got a lot of development to do. And so I think it's a very, very unique, very unique environment in which to try and address these questions. I'm not saying we know the answers, but we've got the goodwill.
Prof, I have to go to break, but I have to give you this chance because the word has been mentioned. You know, we all do not want the neo-colonization. Your views, just a bit before we go to break. Your input into that.
Well, it's never on my mind about neo-colonialism, which is really a thing of the past to me. But one important point that Sir Peter mentioned here is about leveling the field, you know, and that is through capacity building. And that is a very important component in the conversation of the chief scientific advisors of the APEC region.
That's good to know. I will go for the last break, but once we are back, I've stolen a peek into what they're going to discuss, and I saw 2 things. One was mentioned a bit before, which is disaster preparedness and how science and technology can help make that better for us. And we are nearing towards the end of the year, which is November, December. In this country, we're bracing. Last year, we had the once in a 100 year, as Prof. Tan Sri Zachary likes to term it, flood. But I want also to look at this other component that they're going to discuss, which is epistemology, and how do you bridge science as we know it today, also to bridge and link it to the traditional wisdom or local wisdom and knowledge that we have. Because I don't want to be caught in between, I'm a conservative or, you know, guy that refused to move to modern medicine. I do believe in some of the heritage of my tradition, but I also want to use the latest MRIs and whatever not. So how do I draw and make sense in between? That we'll discuss after this short break. You know, I'm very honored every time I get to meet scientists and leaders. But at this APAC, Economist Chief Science Advisor or equivalent meeting, they are both leaders and scientists. So I'm glad, because then I can ask this kind of question to people like Sir Peter Gluckman, like, I don't want to lose my heritage. I want to make sense of, you know, these herbs that my great-grandfather used to eat, and he never had a day in hospital. But, you know, I go for all these supplements and I still don't have the quality of health that he has. So how do we merge science and technology as we know it, and also bring out the long tradition of human history that we have in each of our respective ecosystem, for example?
Well, I think this is a very tough question. It's a very, very important question. Science is at danger of being patronising, saying we know the answers to everything. And the truth is there are limits to science. There are limits to empirical knowledge, and we've got to be honest about what we know and what we don't know. And we've also got to respect the fact that there are other forms of knowledge. Society will be a lot more cohesive, and we will make the best use of science if we respect the fact that there are ways in which other knowledge systems develop, involving heritage, belief, tradition, traditional observation, and so forth. I'm not saying that they can be merged, but I think we can learn to listen to each other better and have a more comfortable way of living alongside each other. If we do that, then I think all people in the population will benefit from what we know from science, but at the same time we won't disturb people's roots, which are fundamental to knowing who they are, where they come from, and where they're going.
Like the long history of the Maoris and, you know, the whites in New Zealand, are you looking at that specifically, or?
Oh, in New Zealand, this is right at the top of our agenda. I mean, it is quite clear that for New Zealand to be a successful society, we have to marry the Western tradition of knowledge and science alongside that deep embedded tradition which is deep in the spiritual lives of every Maori person, and we can have to find ways of making things valid both within the Western scientific tradition and within their knowledge systems. And that's tough.
Yes. For Francis, we have always been said to be the melting pot of culture, the amalgamation of different things staying in one pot and whatever else, because we're at the center. So diversity all the more between the new and the old, the modern and the past. We need to make sense of that too. I think that's top of our agenda too.
Well, in a multicultural and traditional society like Malaysia, indigenous and local knowledge is nothing strange. In fact, it has been almost a way of life for Malaysians, you know. But what is interesting today is the fact that the scientific community worldwide is ready to recognize and engage and examine how traditional knowledge could synergize with conventional science. And I see that with some degree of experience. Even at the very top of the United Nations, at the Scientific Advisory Board of the Secretary General, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, indigenous and local knowledge is one agenda that the Secretary General wants us to examine closely and see how it could complement conventional science in addressing and solving some of the problems that we are facing today in terms of sustainable development, of course.
So Peter Gluckman, before we end, in this country, I think in this show with Prof and other great leaders, we say that the time is now for action. Enough talk about sustainability, let's just do it. We have our next 5-year Malaysian plan, development plan, and we just want to do it. What's your view on that, and how do we straight away do it? Enough talking about it.
I think the world has shifted. I think people now recognise that the planet is being adversely affected by the rapidly rising population and the impact of humans on the planet. Now we have to use science to help ameliorate that so our grandchildren and their grandchildren can have better lives.
Prof. Zachary, our science to action has begun.
Well, it has already started, but I can assure you in Malaysia, The 11th Malaysia plan, which would commence next year, early in 2016, would see how science is translated into action, which would benefit the people of this country.
And when Prof. Takri says science, that's you and me. So thank you so much, gentlemen, for making time to be here. I know you're very, very busy for the APEC Economist Chief Science Advisor and Equivalent meeting, the third meeting ever, and it's in Kuala Lumpur. We're very honored. And thanks to you for watching. And remember, it's not only about science to action, it's about what each of us do. And it begins at home and begins with our own family. So with that, good night. You can send in your views through all the applications that we have online and digitally, YouTube or Facebook or Instagram, or straight away download our iOS and Android app so that you can also give your views directly, live, online. Thank you, good night, and we'll see you again.
Thank you.
So much.
Thank you.
Thank you.